This episode of Brains on Games will preview a set collecting game with an Alice in Wonderland theme. Welcome to Brains on Games. I'm Dr. Brian McDonald. In this episode, we are going to talk about a game that's coming soon to Kickstarter, a game that was sent to me not too long ago by the folks over at Electric Pepper Games, and it is a game called Reflections in the Looking Glass, a game that fits in a little deck of card size tuck box. Reflections in the Looking Glass is a two-player game, but you can play it with kids age 8 and up, and games take anywhere from 10 minutes to half an hour. Let's take a deeper look at Reflections in the Looking Glass. Reflections in the Looking Glass is a light set collecting card drafting game where what you're trying to do is wind up being the player who has the highest absolute score, the score that's furthest away from zero, either positive or negative. It's the highest absolute score. The plus or minus at the beginning doesn't matter. And you achieve that score by collecting sets of these cards. You're going to start the game by drawing a card from a small deck that determines how the tableau that you're choosing from is going to be laid out. And it's always mirrored. So you've got one set of cards on one side, and then as you shuffle them out, they're arranged in the same way on the other side, but they're all dealt out at random. I've set up a partial tableau here just so that you can see how the game's going to look. And then players take turns just choosing one of these cards from the tableau on either side. Now it's arranged so that some cards are facing me and some cards are facing my opponent, but you can choose any card you want as long as it's a card that's not covered up. So I couldn't take any of these ones from the middle row. I can only take from the bottom row here. Two things I think make this game interesting. One is the way that the scoring works. So it is a game where you're collecting these sets of cards, and if you have an even number of cards, you're going to have either a plus or a minus depending on whether you are collecting the moon cards or the sun cards. You can see there's a moon, a sun and a moon symbol on the corner of all of these. So an even number of cards is going to give you a plus sign, or the opposite if you're collecting the opposite color. An odd number of cards will give you the opposite sign. So really, what you really want to do in this game is collect 3 of a kind. If you get, that's going to give you 3 points in either direction. So you want the ones that are going towards the sets that you're collecting. But if you wind up getting stuck with 4 of a kind, then your score drops down to 1. So from 3 to 1. So it is a game where you want triplets and you don't want to get that 4th card, even though there's 4 of each character here in the deck. So you start by laying out the cards in this tableau like I've done here. And like I said, this is only a partial tableau. There's going to be 12 cards left at the end. Each player gets 4 of those cards, and they keep those a secret. 4 cards just go back in the box. They're not used. So those are secret as well. So you don't know what cards the other person has in their hand. Those cards are kept secret, but they are used in scoring at the end. So if I have, say, you can see there's 2 dodos here. If I have a dodo in my hand as well, and I manage to collect both of those from the tableau, that's going to give me my 3 of a kind. But I don't put this out in front of me until the end. The other thing that makes it tricky, so not only am I trying to collect probably 3 of a kind and not 4 of a kind and not 2 of a kind, not only am I trying to collect a certain number of these identical cards, but whenever I choose a card, my opponent is going to get a card as well. That's the looking glass element here of this game. So if I choose this dodo here, that's going to go face up in front of me. So the cards you've chosen are common knowledge. It's only the 4 cards in your hand that are hidden. So if I've chosen the dodo from here, my opponent is going to get the card from the matching location on the other side. So he's going to get the Mad Hatter. If then he chooses his own dodo, then I'm going to get the Mock Turtle down here. And now that's starting to uncover cards that are in the middle. So now you can take Tweedledum and Tweedledee, or the Walrus and the Carpenter, or the White Rabbit, or the Jabberwocky, and you're just going back and forth trying to collect cards to create those sets. Once all the cards have been removed from the tableau and they're placed out in front of you, then you start counting up scores. Let me show you how that's done. So I just grabbed a bunch of cards from the deck without really, so I don't even know, is this the right number that you're going to have at the end of a game? I just grabbed some of these things. So it might not be the exact number of cards that you would expect to have, but it's going to give you an idea of how scoring works. So like I said, 3 of a kind is what you're trying to get. And if I've got 3 moons, that's going to give me -3 points. But here I've also got 3 suns, and that's a +3. So these 2 groups of cards are going to cancel one another out. So far in this top row here, with all these 3 of a kind, I'm only going to get -3 points. I've got a couple of pairs of sun cards, and pairs of suns are going to give me a -2. So now I've got -2, -4, and this is going to give me a +1. So altogether, I'm going to have -3, -5, -7, +1 is -6. So my total score is going to be 6, and then my opponent is going to count up theirs as well. And like I said, the sign plus or minus doesn't matter. It's the absolute score. The furthest from 0 is what you're trying to get. And we found when we were playing the game, we were usually getting between 9 and 13 points because we'd get stuck with cards that we didn't want, but often we weren't trying to mess with one another as much as you might when you're actually playing the game. So it allowed each player to kind of run away a little bit in terms of their scoring. Now, what skills are you working on when you play Reflections in the Looking Glass? Well, it is a game where you're going to find your score bouncing around depending on how many of each card you have in front of you. And so there is a lot of mental math that you're doing. It's only plus or minus up to 3, but once you collect multiple different sets of these cards, you're going to be doing those calculations over and over again and adding and subtracting as you go. Now, you can cancel out opposing sets, but you're not going to, I don't think you'll want to, during the game, organize them in a way that makes it easy to tell which ones are being canceled. Why? Because then your opponent can tell what it is that you're looking for more easily. So you might not want to do that. You've got this handy cheat sheet, and I like the way that this is organized because they have it set up so that you've got either the sets of cards that will give you pluses or minuses, or it can be split up in a different way, and it's the suns and the moons instead. So it just makes it easy for the players, depending on how best they want to visualize those scores, to figure out what their totals are going to be. So you're doing a lot of mental math, and you're juggling those numbers in your mind. And anytime you're juggling information in memory, we are going to be talking about working memory. Working memory is like the whiteboard in your mind. That's where you hold information so you can work with it. And anytime you're doing mental math, that's a working memory exercise. Now, there's a little tiny bit, I would say, of executive functioning skills here as well. Why is that? Well, the executive functions are the abilities and behaviors and skills that you need to work towards a goal. And you might find yourself saying, well, okay, I've got 2 of these Jabberwocky cards and the third one is buried. I want to work towards freeing that card up so that I can be the one who gets it and my opponent doesn't take it on me. Anytime you're planning like that and you're trying to tackle things in an organized way, you are using those executive functioning skills. So it is a game where working memory and mental math are important, and there's a little bit of those executive functions and planning thrown in for good measure. Final thoughts, though, about Reflections in the Looking Glass. Well, this is a set collecting and card drafting game where I think that the randomized layout of the cards in the deck does add to the replayability. The patterns are going to be different each game in how things are laid out. You might only have 4 cards that are open at the start, or you might have a lot more than that. So it does, I think, make things interesting. And then the scoring makes things interesting as well. The way that you can stick a player with the card that they don't want, well, you're getting a card, hopefully, that's one that's going to add some points for you. I do think makes it a fun game to play with the younger kids especially. It's sort of a good introduction to these kinds of, I think of Seven Wonders Duel, which would be the last game where things were laid out kind of in a pyramid and you were drafting those cards. This is a version of maybe that Seven Wonders style of play, but it's simplified and it's easily accessible, I think. Plus, you get that math exercise that you don't get with with every single game that you play. The other thing that I like the theme of going back and forth and kind of forcing the other player to take cards they don't want. But the artwork is great. The art is a lot of fun on these cards. I think it was fun that they included not just the Alice in Wonderland characters, but we've got the Jabberwocky poem referenced as well. And I do remember reading that when I was in school and enjoying it. So, you've got good artwork, a good theme, a little bit of randomness in terms of how the game is going to be laid out that can add to the replayability. And then you've got that mirror image and the funny scoring. So this is an interesting game. And I think a great introduction to kids for this sort of set collecting, card drafting, those mechanics that you're going to be practicing when you play this game. If there's a downside to Reflections in the Looking Glass, it's the fact that this is a 2-player game. If both of my kids are home, I can't play it with both of them. So it's 2 players only. There's no team version or solo mode that you can play for Reflections in the Looking Glass. So you've got to have just one other opponent when you want to pull this thing out and play it. But here we have a small box card game that's a good introduction, I think, to that drafting mechanic, like I said. Thanks so much to the folks over at Electric Pepper Games for sending this game my way. I will put information about the Kickstarter campaign in the show notes below the video. If you have any questions or comments, you can leave them in the comments section below the video, or you can email me at brian@brainsongames.ca. Brainsongames.ca is the website. That's where future episodes will go. The previous ones are up there already. Brains on Games is the Twitter handle and the Facebook page and the Instagram feed, so we're all over the place. And if you enjoyed this video and you want to be notified of future ones, you can head on over to YouTube and click that subscribe button. Thanks for joining me, and hopefully I'll see you next time.